What a joy to be with you again. And, Charles, we don't give enough credit to our song leaders. Wednesday night when I got back to Dover and taught class, afterwards I talked to one of the elders and I told him, I said, you know how many of the men that can lead singing? And it's a rare thing. We have 3 song leaders at Dover. And I've known congregations a lot larger that, struggle to have one. And you have so many talented men and willing men who are willing to do so many different things. And I commend you for that. As you read the Bible, there are some statements that stand out. And I don't know how many times you've read the Bible, but sometimes you sort of look at that passage and say, I've read this before, I don't remember it saying that way. And something jumps out at you. But there is a passage that we find in Luke, 22nd chapter, verses 31 to 32. And they jump out at you. And if you have really absorbed what it says, it scares you half to death. Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And you, when you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. Scares me to death to think that Satan could say to Jesus, I want Randy, and for him to come after me. I don't know about you, but that scares me. The thing that really helps me deal with it is that Jesus says, but I have prayed for you. If I don't have Jesus in my corner, trying to withstand Satan is a losing battle. There's a story that is told of a man on a plane making an announcement, and the pilot in the front makes an announcement, and the co-pilot usually, while the pilot's going through the instruments, the co-pilot makes the announcement. And the people were on board and they heard the announcement that everyone who was heading for Chicago was to remain on that plane. But the intercom was still on, and over it could be heard on the other side of the cockpit door from there, whoops. And everybody on that plane is thinking, whoops, what's wrong with this airplane? And it was not very long after that the pilot came down the aisle with a briefcase. And someone said, where are you going? He said, Denver. And one of the people said, but this plane's going to Chicago. He said, I know, I'm on the wrong plane. Good they got that whoops in time. We make mistakes, don't we? Rob Swartz was a good friend of my youngest son, and his father was an elder in the congregation at Southside in Winchester, Virginia, where we worked. And he was always forgetting something. And he said, okay, I forgot. And it just became you know me, I forget things. So he got his driver's license and he got a car. And in Virginia, you can buy personalized plate. You pay $25 first year, that's all you pay. From then on, it's the regular price. And so there's a lot of that goes on in Virginia. And he said, oops, I forgot. Okay, Rob, yep, we know where you've been with that. We all make mistakes. It's surprising to many how the Bible does not gloss over the failures of its leaders. Most people don't want anything written that, generations in the future are going to see that covers their problems. Almost every president, as they near the end of their presidency, begins to be concerned about, their legacy. What is history going to say about them? But we need to realize that our present follows us. It becomes our past. And we often allow our past failures to haunt us. And we also allow our present failures to torment us. And we let our future failures worry us. And if we get bogged down in that, we can get nothing done. I want to share with you a quote from John Ortberg, who wrote a book, If You're Going to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat. He says, the decision to grow always involves a choice between risk and comfort. This means that to be a follower of Jesus, you must renounce comfort as the ultimate value of your life. And that's sobering news to most of us because we're into comfort. But water walkers master failure. Did Peter fail? Failure is not an event, but rather a judgment about an event. Failure is not something that happens to us or a label we attach to things. It is a way we think about outcomes. Did Peter fail? Well, I suppose in a way he did. His faith wasn't strong enough. His doubts were stronger. He saw the wind. He took his eyes off of where they should have been. He sank. He failed. But here's what I think. I think there were 11 bigger failures sitting in the boat. They failed quietly. They failed privately. Their failure went unnoticed, unobserved, uncriticized. Only Peter knew the shame of public failure, but only Peter knew two other things as well. Only Peter knew, there's a misprint there. Only Peter knew other things as well. Only Peter knew the glory of walking on water. He alone knew what it was to attempt to do what he was not capable of doing on his own. Then feeling euphoria of being empowered by God to actually do it. Once you walk on water, you never forget it. Not for the rest of your life. The other day we were in Bible class in Dover, and the man said something about his wife. The new preacher down there said something about his wife, and he said, "It'll be okay, folks. I'll feed her ice cream when we get home." And she said, "Only if you have fudge ripple," or something like that. And I thought, ooh. Well, there are some things that if you experience it, you want to experience it again. There are some ice creams, and fudge ripple's not mine, but at any rate, ice cream is something I truly enjoy. My mother lectured me for a half hour about gaining so much weight. She was doing the dishes. Dad and I were trying to talk in the living room, but she just talked about my weight. And then when she got through with the dishes, she walked out with a Corel cereal. I call it cereal bowls. Not the little one, the big cereal bowl. And it was heaped over with ice cream. And I thought, ooh, she's going to have a snack. She brought it and set it before me. And I said, "Mom, you just lectured me for a half an hour about ice cream. And now you give me a huge bowl of ice cream." And she said, "A little bit of ice cream never hurt anyone." I know where I got my ice cream fetish. Anyway, I think we need to realize that we're going to have problems. We're going to have failures. But we can overcome them when we can experience good things in life. The Bible doesn't say, here are 5 ways to overcome failure. Okay? But it does give us some principles that we can follow, and we gather them from different places. First of all, we need to accept the love and forgiveness of Christ. We've got to learn to love, to accept that love and forgiveness. A lot of people can't believe that Jesus will forgive us or can forgive us. Or he can forgive other people, but he can't forgive me. Or he can forgive some things, but he can't forgive what I did. And we need to learn to accept these things. In Psalm 103, the 13th verse, just as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. I love that passage, don't you? Man, there's just nothing about that passage I don't like. I mean, maybe that I fail him, but to know that there's a loving God who's willing to forgive me, who has compassion for me, who treats me as my father. There was a time in my life when I did something and I didn't know my dad had found it out. I drove home, pulled up on the driveway, parked in front of the garage like we always did. Dad walked out of the house, came around the front of the car, and I went, this is different. Dad doesn't do this. I got out of the car and I said, what is it, Dad? And he said, I just learned that you did such and such. Is that true? I didn't lie. I wanted to be anywhere but there. I said, yes, Dad, it's true. I felt horrible. If you could see the expression on my father's face as he said, I'm disappointed. And then he turned around and walked back in the house. Oh, Dad, please whip me. I was old enough to drive a car. I was too old to be whipped, right? I would have taken my own belt off and given it to him and let him whip me if he'd take that look off his face. I never wanted to disappoint my father again. And to this day, when I have to pray to God and say, God, I messed up, I see that look on my dad's face. But my dad forgave me. God will forgive us. I want us to look at this 103rd Psalm some more. The first 5 verses. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Wouldn't that be a beautiful song? Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget none of his benefits, who pardons all our iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with loving kindness and compassion, who satisfies your years with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagle. Oh, glory. What a wonderful passage. God, as our Father, has provided a means for our forgiveness. When we were still enemies, Romans 5 and verse 8, he gave us his Son to die for us. His blood cleanses us from all of our past failures, Romans 5 and verse 9. Know that God loves us and forgives us. He knew that we would mess up before he created us, and still created us. He's a loving God. Second, we need to learn from our mistakes. Do you remember Peter? Peter messed up, didn't he? Did Peter stay in his failure? As a matter of fact, if we say Peter messed up, it's one of those times where you say, which time? One thing about Peter, he let you know what was on his mind. And sometimes it wasn't a good thing. He was impetuous. And he many times spoke before he thought. And the Lord censured him for that. But he's the one who spoke on the day of Pentecost that's recorded. The others spoke, but what he said is recorded. Why? because by his mistakes he learned humility. And it wasn't until Peter became humble that he could be useful by God. We learn from our mistakes. Not only did Peter learn from his mistakes, but what about John Mark? There's passages here. And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who's also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. There's 4 passages that mention him. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who was also called Mark. And then in the 15th chapter, Barnabas wanted to take John, called Mark, along with him also. But Paul kept insisting that they should not take him along, who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there occurred a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another, and Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But later in Paul's life, though he separated from Barnabas there, he writes and says, "Only Luke is with me. Pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for service." Jesus told a parable one time of a man who had 2 sons. And he asked them to go into the field, and one said, I'm not going. And the other said, I'll go. The one who said, I'll go, didn't. And the one who said no, did. 2-way repentance. One repented from good to evil. One repented from evil to good. It's not, did we ever mess up, make the wrong decision? It's, did we ever learn from that mistake and step forward from it? Third thing that we can do is to move beyond our past mistakes. Can't live in the past. I know that's easier said than done. But consider these quotes. If you have made mistakes, there's always another chance for you. You may have a fresh start any moment you choose. For this thing we call failure is not the falling down, but the staying down. A person who doubts himself is like a man who would enlist in the ranks of his enemies and bear arms against himself. He makes his failure certain by himself being the first person to be convinced of it. You can choose what to think about and upon what you want to spend your time meditating. How did you get where you are? Choices. You made decisions. You made choices. If you want to go from here to your house today, when you come to an intersection, you've got to choose to go straight, take a right, take a left. You get to your destination by the choices that you've made. If you don't like where you are, you change those choices. And that moves you to a new place. In Philippians 3, verse 13, "Brethren, I do not regard myself as having laid a hold yet of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead." Ah, yes. What did Paul say? Paul said to Timothy, "I'm the chiefest of sinners." Now, was Paul a mean-minded man? He did some pretty mean things, didn't he? But in Acts 23 and verse 1, he said he had lived with a clean conscience before God to that day. Everything that he had done, nasty as it was, wrongful as it was, he did it because he thought that's what God wanted him to be doing. But when he realized it was not, put those things aside, and I step on with my life. That's all you can really do, isn't it? We can't change history. And then, we're going to borrow this one from Forrest Gump. You have to do the best with what God gave you. remember that. I got a kick out of sitting in front of my brother tonight and singing. I've always enjoyed that wonderful voice of his. He can sing. And I don't say that to worship his voice or just to praise him, get on his good side. I just enjoy it. In Dover, we have a group, a quartet, that's used to sing. They've had to give it up because of work conflict schedules. But the bass and the alto sit across the aisle from me, and the tenor and the soprano sit right in front of us. And whenever I used to, when I was preaching down there, time for me to get up and preach, I go up early and stand right in front of this. I call it the sweet spot. Oh. Now, I can't sing like Steve sings. I don't have the voice he has. I don't have the knowledge of the music and the training that he's had. So I've got to sing with what I've got. It's never going to compare to Steve's. But it's what God's given me. And God expects no more of me than what he's given me. And so that's what I have to do. There was a violinist who was very famous for manufacturing violins. And there was a man who was very skilled. While this violin maker was skilled at making the violin, this other man was skilled at using his fingers to play the violin. And so he ordered a violin from this violin maker. The man made the violin the best that he could, took it and gave it to the man, and the man picked it up and started to playing it and was totally disappointed. He was so upset, he took the fiddle and threw it on the floor, broke it to pieces. And the violin maker was very sorry. And he took that violin home. And he said, I'll try to do better. And he took that same violin and piece by piece put it together, tried to put it together in a way that made it better. And he shipped it this time to the man. And the man played it. And he sent back news that it was such a wonder. It's what he expected in the first place. And he was shocked to find out it was the same violin. The man just did the best with what he had and presented it again. Oh, you remember, girls, when you got those roses from your boyfriend? Oh, how much you loved those roses. Remember the emotion that you felt? Roses are expensive, right? There's a reason why roses are expensive. Now, if I bring my wife dandelions, I can't produce that feeling in her heart.
Really?
But all three of my sons brought her dandelions in the spring, and she got that feeling. She expects something from me she doesn't expect from them. Right? God expects something from us he doesn't expect from others. He's placed you in history because he has a purpose for you and for your life. You do your thing. I worked for 5 years at a Toyota dealership as a parts manager. And someone was telling me about all the wonderful things that were in that car, these different cars. I said, that's a wonderful sports car you've got, or that's a nice big luxury car you've got, or whatever it was. They showed me what they bought, and they'd be all thrilled, and I said, that's fine. I'd take a 10-cent part and stop it dead in its tracks. What are you talking about? I said, I can go over there and take the cap off the valve to the tire and pull that valve stem out of the middle. And you know what happens when you take the valve stem out of the valve? It won't hold air. Tires won't hold air. You're not going to go anywhere. God may have made you to be a valve stem. But that Cadillac or that Corvette or that SUV will not run and perform like it should without the valve stem. If God made you a valve stem, hold air. If God made you the beautiful top that goes up and down, then go up and down. Whatever God designed you for, whatever He's called you to, do it to the best of your ability. I want to give you some people. I want to give you some illustrations. There was a teenage girl whose popularity was very low, and it convinced her that she was not very attractive at all. But she became a top fashion model, hailed by many as the most beautiful woman in the world. Her name, Claudia Schiffer. How about that? Convinced she was ugly by the value of others. There was a man who was too awkward and too clumsy to even be allowed to be the ball boy on the tennis courts. But Stan Smith became the number one tennis player in all the world in 1972 and 1973. Crime novels have their own venue and they sell a lot of them. There was a man who received an unbroken succession of 743 rejections for his novel. But now, John Creasy has sold over 60 million books. A man was sent to a gym, and the gym instructor said, "What will they send me next?" Sir Edmund Hillary became the man who was the first to conquer Mount Everest. This guy's bald, skinny, and he can dance a little. That was written of Fred Astaire. Music teacher declared this man hopeless at composing music. We know him as Beethoven. This boy's parents feared that he was subnormal. We know him as simply Einstein. A woman went to hear a man preach. She was a missionary's daughter. She knew something about preaching. She wanted to scream and run out of a sermon that was being delivered by this man, Billy Graham, whom she later married. Don't measure yourself against another person. Okay? In Galatians 6 and verse 4, but each one must examine his own work, and then he will have reason for boasting in regard to himself alone, and not in regard to another. In 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 12, for if the readiness is present, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. Measuring yourself against another person really does you no good nor anyone else. And then finally, be persistent. Be persistent. There's a great difference between failing and being a failure. Majority of the great historic accomplishments of the past have been the final result of a persistent struggle against discouragement and that failure. A man is never beaten until he thinks he is. Without perseverance, the chances of succeeding are small indeed. Thomas Edison. If you don't have strong beliefs, you won't have the power for flexible persistence. We've all heard about Thomas Edison and his 10,000 failures before he found it. But he said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work.
Right. That's right, man.
I can identify with that. I don't know about you, but I can. But in all these things, we overwhelmingly conquer. That's not the end of the sentence, is it? Through him who loved us. God took a bunch of slaves who had only been trained to do what the masters wanted them to do, and led them out of Egypt and into the wilderness and eventually into the promised land. They were just slaves. But God could do mighty things through those slaves if they would just submit to him. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. My friends, no one is a failure who has Jesus as their Lord. On the other hand, no one is a success, ultimately, who does not have Jesus as their Lord. Well, there's the lesson. I hope it's beneficial in some degree to you. We're all going to goober. We're going to make mistakes. I've surely got my share of them. But that doesn't mean we quit. When I found myself retired from preaching, I thought, what next? I'm still asking myself what next. And I know that I'm doing things for God. I want something I can bite, I can get a hold of. And I know that I want to do full-time work again. But all of us have those moments in our lives, don't we? Where we take stock, we look and we see, how can God use me? Sometimes we try the wrong way. There's some things that I don't do as well, and I have to recognize that and not do that. There are other things I do better, and I try to work at that and succeed at that. All of us have those decisions that we have to make. But the best decision you'll ever make is submitting to Jesus Christ. I've done a number of funerals. I don't know how many. I have buried children that died at birth. I buried a woman who lacked just a few days of being 100. I've never buried a Christian who said, I'm sorry, I became a Christian. I have talked to a man who lay on his deathbed and said, pray for me. I want to be baptized. But the doctor said if we try to lift him off the bed, he'll die. There's no chance. My friends, we can be successes, but we've got to get out of the boat. We've got to make that start. Would you make that start with Jesus? Come as we stand and sing.